Louder. Welcome to the West Jordan Board of Adjustment meeting for today, September 10th, 2024. We have all of our board members here. Michael Wilson, Christine Wright, Augustine Avalos, Clifton Smith, and Bill Heiner. Item number one on our agenda is to the approval of the minutes from last week, or last month, excuse me.
Mr. Chair, I think this is just a pre-meeting.
Oh, yeah,
right
that's
now.
right. Never mind.
So we won't start the actual meeting until 6 o'clock.
Got ahead of myself, sorry.
Yep, just a pre-meeting to give a little introduction, and then we can discuss the statute as well. So that way, if there's any questions on just kind of what the statute says or anything, we can discuss those beforehand.
Perfect, thank you. So if anyone has any questions or any discussion prior, any thoughts?
Mr. Chair, maybe if Mark wanted to just kind of give a general introduction to the proposal that's on the table, our main agenda item, the variance request. We can at least just kind of give a summary, and that'll give the board some time to review things as well, and if there's any questions.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just.
Time over.
Thank you. So the item before you tonight is a variance for a request to modify the requirement to bury some overhead utility lines. So this is involving a subdivision. It's brand new, just barely got recorded a few weeks ago. But in talking to Rocky Mountain Power and some of the solutions that they were advising us on that it would take to bury the power, felt that a variance would probably be the best course of action rather than implementing some of those intense changes to the frontage of the property. So basically, with variances, there's 5 criteria that you'll have to consider tonight. So the first one deals more specifically with an existing physical hardship or hardships. And those physical hardships cannot be self-imposed. They have to be they had to be there when the property owner bought the property. They can't be economic, so they can't request a variance for financial reasons. And then they have to be on the property for which the variance is being requested. So that's kind of what the first criteria entails. And then the second criteria deals more with circumstances that are unusual to the property, not necessarily found in ubiquitously throughout the neighborhood. So that's second. And then the third deals more with a request for the variance. So by granting the variance, it would basically allow them to keep a substantial property right that other properties in the neighborhood enjoy. So that's the third one. And then the fourth one is dealing with consistency with the general plan, making sure that the variance request doesn't conflict with any of the goals or policies in that plan. And then the final criteria is just dealing with, by granting the variance, that the spirit of the ordinance is maintained and then substantial justice is done. So that's just kind of an overview of what we'll be looking at tonight. But yeah, if there's any questions, I can answer those for you.
I have a question or two. I was looking at the zoning map, and it shows that it's the zone R18C. Previously, it had been the RR.5A. Why was it changed do we have information on? Because it feels like it's an island out there kind
Yeah.
of in the middle.
Well, that doesn't really have any bearing on what we're looking at tonight, but since you asked the question, so that particular property was rezoned by the city council a few years ago. But the future land use map, it's a little different because, yeah, you're right, that most of that area is zoned rural residential half-acre lots. But the future land use map, which is kind of the general vision for the city, is calling for a lower density there. And so what they were wanting to do was to kind of match that for that property so that they could subdivide it and get a few more lots in there.
But so then the requirement to bury utilities bury the power is basically on any property that's being subdivided in this case.
It is,
and
yes.
Regardless of the zone or anything like that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So the subdivision is what's really triggering that requirement.
So
especially in this
can
case.
you expand on how this is different than the daycare, like pretty much across the street that you guys recommended to not grant their variance?
Yeah, so this one has a few unique characteristics with it. More specific, well, before I get into that, I mean, with each property, we have to look at those on a very case-by-case basis, especially with a variance, because we're dealing with, unique physical characteristics of the lot. But some of the things that are kind of unique to this one is the narrow frontage, for one thing. It's about 100 feet, give or take. And with that being, I mean, that's not necessarily the biggest physical hardship, but it's kind of one of many. So there's that. Plus, there's a multi-directional pole on the northeast corner that when we talked to Rocky Mountain Power, they deemed it too unsafe for them to run any electrical lines up that pole. So in order to do that, they actually have to install another pole about 10 feet away from it, run the lines over to it, and then run the lines down that new pole. And then in addition to that, as part of the transition on the south end, we've got to add another pole there as well. So we're basically adding, we'll end up with 3 poles instead of just 1. So it's kind of
3 poles, including the multi-directional existing.
including that one, yes.
Can you explain what a multi-directional pole is?
Yeah, so it's basically a support pole that allows lines to go in multiple directions. So you've got the main lines, which are running north to south, parallel to Redwood Road. And then you've got a couple of smaller lines running east to west. One of those goes across Redwood Road, and another one goes back about 100 feet to the neighbor's shed and house there. So.
And board, sorry to interject. Maybe if you haven't yet, Google Maps has kind of some good street view and aerial views to kind of check out kind of some of the lay of these poles. It can be hard to understand like where they're at without some perspective even, but yeah, Google Maps has just some interesting, I think, street views, even some historical street views you can change and go back into time and just kind of see some of those different views as well. But
Yeah,
just-
I did look at it. It is an interesting situation. One other question I had, just in the ability of this board to do things. And this was a similar conversation that we had with that daycare property. If that doesn't ever, if one property doesn't change and then submit to the requirements, when the other properties around it, if they subdivided or if they had to bury their utilities, then potentially it could make it hard for them to do it because this property hasn't done it. I would assume, because they have to put in the new poles to bring it up. So my question is, can this board make any conditions on a variance saying, okay, we'll grant it until properties around it are also doing work, or is that outside of our ability to do?
So my understanding of your question is whether you can condition the granting of the variance on surrounding properties' compliance with the requirement to bury power lines. Is that?
Yeah, because I imagine that if a property to the side of it buried theirs, and we're required to bury theirs, and this one wasn't, and then would that make it a little harder for that property then to bury theirs? I'm just wondering about like, if we granted this variance, would it make it harder to implement the code down the line if others of these properties subdivide?
So it's actually a good question. And maybe let me frame it this way in a response. That's the heart of a variance, right? A variance says, here's the code, and the code should apply across the board to everybody equally. And then somebody applies and comes in and says, I need a variance for my situation because my situation is unique. And so I think Mark mentioned, Mr. Forsyth mentioned, that, each application needs to be taken under individual consideration. I would say each application for a variance should be considered on the facts of the situation, on the uniqueness of the situation, on the property characteristics that are presented, and the board is able to make a determination independently. There's not a concept of stare decisis or anything that you need to be worried about so far as prior decisions go. My recommendation to you would be to look just at this situation, look at the facts presented in this situation, look at the property in this situation, look at the law, and see if you feel like things are satisfied and met, just uniquely on this one. I will say, I think, and Mr. Forsyth can maybe speak to this, but I think there was some fairly recent development to the west of this property, behind the property line. So yeah, so there's been some development nearby. There's been subdivisions on Redwood Road. This is definitely not the first one, won't be the last one. So there's some, I think, history on kind of those types of things. So does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. I don't know. I don't know that it feels satisfying, but it helps.
Yeah.
Because it does make sense that we're only considering this one and not considering future.
And I understand, having read a lot of case law, I understand, where sometimes making conditions on other situations or looking at kind of a big picture would make sense. In this case, the council has looked at the big picture and they've said, bury your power lines. They don't allow for exceptions. The only exception is really a variance based on unique circumstances. So.
Okay. Another question I had was it discusses the 2023 general plan, which was talking about burying utilities, and the main purpose of it was aesthetic. Could you describe the difference between the general plan and the city code? I mean, I'm assuming these are two different documents.
Yeah, they are. And actually, Mr. Forsyth is probably best suited to
Yeah.
do that.
I'll field that one. Give Patrick a rest. So the general plan is really more of the kind of the overall vision or blueprint of the city. So it's really just that. It's a general plan. So these are kind of the general goals and policies that we'd like to see happen. And these aren't really specific goals. They're really more kind of broad goals to allow for flexibility and different situations. And then the zoning ordinance is kind of the implementation of that general plan. So those are the rules, those are the laws, those are the ordinances that that reflect those goals and policies of the general plan and really kind of put them into action. So I hope that makes sense.
And so actually, maybe I can just go one more and say, you know, are they different? Yeah, the city code is the law. The general plan is wish list outline of sorts. It carries not the same weight in those types of determinations. But the code does say that one of the variance criterias is the subsection D. The variance will not substantially affect the general plan and will not be contrary to the public interest. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry for dominating all the questions.
No,
Anybody
I did
else have
see a couple
questions?
other lights, so I didn't know if anybody else had any other questions or if that was.
I had a comment. I think all of us were probably thinking this exact same thing, and you certainly brought that up about the daycare where, you know, that was recommended to not be granted. Yet this is, so we were just wondering, obviously, what the differences were, right? So if I understand correctly, basically, we have to analyze each situation completely different. And in this case, sounds like it's due to the property characteristics. The next thing that I guess pops up to mind is, you know, with the daycare situation, it was an existing building that just didn't be subdivided, right? And with this new one, it's actually new development. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, you know, if we can grant variances that are like this specifically for new developments as opposed to existing developments that are just subdivided. How do we analyze that specifically and not have, you know, the community think that only new developments that are being subdivided can actually get a variance versus those that are existing?
You're doing all the heavy mental lifting up there. Yeah. Understand that the reason why we have a board is to answer the hard questions, is to bring in community members to make these determinations of what is the difference between them, right? If every decision, if we were going to say the law is the law is the law, no exceptions, no variances, end of story. But the code, state code and city, says there should be exceptions made for certain circumstances. And if you can show that these circumstances are satisfied, then it's up to the discretion of the board to grant that. Not everybody may agree. People may not disagree. This board may make a different decision than a board 5 years from now, may make a different decision than 5 years in the past. It's tough to know other than to just look at this situation and say, what is the reasoning for it? What is unique about this situation? Did, you know, kind of like Mr. Forsyth said, is this a situation that's created by the property owner, or is it existing essentially with the land? I think those are some of the best ways to look at it. I would also just say if you've got, and we've got time obviously, but the code is Title 13, Chapter 7G, G as in George, subsection 3. So if you wanted to look just even at what the code says and just familiarize yourself with kind of the language there, because at the end of the day, if a decision is challenged in court, the court will look at the statute and they will want to know that you did as well. And so my recommendation would just be to make sure that you feel satisfied on each of the legal elements as they're provided for in the code.
Just a couple questions. How big is the parcel, the whole parcel? Maybe I missed it.
That's a good question. I
It was a
think
half
it's.
acre, wasn't
it?
1.3.
Are you talking about the lot that fronts Redwood Road or the entire subdivision?
Just the entire slip? Is that what,
Oh,
The entire
was
subdivision.
that what was 1.34?
I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, but I can find out for you.
That's what it says in this packet,
Okay.
1.34 acre parcel.
Okay. And then we're just looking at the power from the road to the residences, correct? Going underline? or
Yeah, so
underground?
we're primarily looking at the overhead power lines along Redwood Road.
And the big difference with this one is just the 2 additional poles that would have to be added. That's
Yes,
what
that's
makes
one of the
this-
reasons. Mhm.
Okay.
If we have time for one more question. So I know that it talks about the horseshoe driveway on this property and that's how the poles will interfere with that drive. And it's a gravel drive. It looks like it just goes parallel to the fence there. Um, I mean, it feels like a silly question maybe, but um, it- it's an existing condition to the property, but in how a gravel driveway doesn't seem like a big obstacle to move or to change. So I guess when we're looking at existing characteristics of the property, maybe that's a decision we have to make, but can I get any kind of guidance on, something that seems like it could be easily moved? Should that be considered in this as a real obstacle as an existing condition?
Um, this is probably a good topic of conversation for the meeting itself to be discussed amongst the board. But I would maybe say that under the code, requirement A2 states that the alleged hardship comes from circumstances peculiar to the property, not from conditions that are general to the neighborhood. And then B is there are special circumstances attached to the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the same district and relate directly to the hardship complained of. So I would just have you maybe look at those elements as you analyze kind of that question, but that's a good question.
Okay, sounds like something we can discuss as we have the meeting.
Um, yeah, I do have an answer for you on the acreage of that. So it's 1.34 acres.
That includes the house that's currently on it?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, just with the time kind of coming up, if you wanted to just close the pre-meeting, and then we will commence the actual meeting at 6 o'clock.
We'll now close the pre-meeting and give it a couple of more minutes and we'll start the actual meeting.
Presentation, control your slides. Yep. Looks good. Right now.
Welcome to the West Jordan Board of Adjustment meeting on September 10th, 2024. Members seated here on the front dais are Michael Wilson, Christine Wright, Augustine Avalos, Clifton Smith, and I'm Bill Heiner. We'll start with our first item on the agenda. Has the panel had an opportunity to review the minutes?
I reviewed them and I moved that we accepted.
Thank you.
I'll
we-
second the motion.
Thank you. We have a first by Michael Wilson and seconded by Christine Wright. The minutes from the last meeting have been accepted. We'll go ahead now and move on to our second item on the
Sorry,
agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Excuse me.
did you want to take a vote on that motion?
Oh, okay. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-1. All
Sorry,
right.
what, did you say 5-1?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5-0.
5-0, excuse me. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm thinking. Okay. Second item on the agenda is, find the right one, is the item number 2 is the Redwood subdivision, 8482 South Redwood Road, variance to the code requirement to bury the overhead utilities, R18C zone. Juan Zuniga, is that,
Yes,
pronounce that right? Thank you. Is the applicant. Mark Forsythe is the planner. And go ahead and turn the time over to the applicant. Give you a
Okay.
presentation. Welcome.
okay, my English is not very well. I have one guy, he's coming just to help me. I am going to do my best. He's coming just to help me, I need to know the questions, what you ask for me, you know? He's coming, maybe he's in the traffic. Okay, I'm going to start. I have this project, this subdivision. I'm going to build 4 houses behind of my house. And before to the construction, I have a person in the one meeting. That guy told me I need I need to talk with the Rocky Mountain Power before to the construction. I need to get the meeting with him and explain him what is my project and where we going to get the power to the houses. And the Rocky Mountain Power guy, he told me like, if you wanna do exactly what the plan say, you need put the electric post on Redwood Road. Using the corner of my house, you need put the post just right here to bring the power down, and everything on the ground, you can have power for those houses. That is what the Rocky Mountain say. I bring all the information what these guys told me to the city. The city told me you can put one more post on Redwood Road because it's dangerous. It's a lot of things on Redwood Road. Is the water lines, gas lines, internet wires, and a lot of stuff on Redwood Road. I say, okay, you need to go with, again, make a meeting with the Rocky Mountain Power, ask those guys the second option. My second option is left side of my house, I have a electric post. I need to run the wires from the post all the way behind of my house. And I need to put one more post south side of the property. But again, it's the same thing. I need to put the post. I bring everything to the city, and the city say, no, go back, talk with the Rocky Mountain Power. Maybe those guys has other option for you. I make a meeting. I make the easements with my engineers and everything. And the solution is no on Redwood Road behind in the other street. I need to bring the power from the other street to the Redwood Road. Both behind of my property is a land. I make everything. I need to talk with the owner of my neighbor behind me. I make everything, all the paperwork and everything, but he no want to give me chance he no give me a chance to pass my pipes and my wires from his land. I bring everything what he told me to the city. Those guys send me again with the Rocky Mountain Power. I have a meeting with those guys. Those guys told me, you have the last option. The last option, go with the other neighbor next to you on the south side and ask that guy if he let you bring the power from his property. I make everything with the engineers. The engineers give me everything. He decided to sign the easement, and I'm going to bring the power from this street behind of the Redwood Road. I'm going to bring the power from there. But now, the city asked me to bury my power lines of my house. That house is just in front of Redwood Road. I need put underground my power lines. And I have a meeting with the Rocky Mountain guy. That guy told me, like, if you want to do that, you need to put the post. You can see in this picture, right here is my plan. I'm going to bring the power from the other side of of my house. And the question is, right here in the Redwood Road, these guys, these companies, do the same thing what I want to do. And those guys has the existing power lines in front of their houses. I bring 3 different constructions, same place, Redwood Road, same city, is from maybe less of 5 minutes away from here. It's on Redwood Road. They do exactly the same what I wanna do. And these guys has everything more easy because those guys has the power meter and next to the post on is right side of the houses. And that is very easy to bury those power lines. If you can see the pictures, you can see on right side, it's very easy. They can put on the ground the power lines. On my case, on my house, let me see. these pictures. Right there in the corner in the bottom on this right side. You can see the corner of my house. Right there is my power meter. You guys can see? Yeah. The power meter is the other side of the house. It's on left side, no it's on right side. Nada más vamos a ver si tienen alguna pregunta para mí. I think that's everything for me. One more thing, if I need bury my power lines, you can see in those pictures is a lot of stuff I need to work with because I need cross gas line, water lines, and 1 week ago, the machines are working to put the fiber, the Google fiber for internet. That one too.
Can you
If he-
go back a couple pictures
Okay.
for me? Keep going.
That one?
Nope, go back. One more. Thanks.
If you see the red lines from my house to Redwood Road, those are the wires, what I have. I have my power line and my internet line.
Can I ask a question now? Or,
When he's
oh, okay.
Yes.
So
Yes,
is there a
absolutely.
reason why the new power and telecom lines cannot just go further to the existing home? I don't know who can answer that.
Sorry, so,
The little blue dotted line, the new power lines, they hit all
Well,
four
it-
of the lots, but why can't it keep
It
going
will
to
with
the
our
house?
variance.
well,
It'll continue, correct?
Okay,
no, so
No.
my understanding of the blue line, the blue dotted line there, is that that would be the new power and telecom lines to be buried.
Yes.
And Christine, I think, I'm sorry, Ms. Wright, your question is whether that buried line can simply continue heading eastward to the rear of the home that's facing on Redwood Road. Is that right?
correct. I mean, wherever on the house it
Yeah.
would connect.
Mr. Forsyth, I don't know if that's a better question.
Yeah,
for
no,
you.
Mr. Boyce had it correct. So the blue line does represent the new power lines that'll be buried for the subdivision. We figured that was probably the best solution in terms of meeting the spirit of the ordinance. But there still kind of remains of the issue of what to do about the existing power lines along Redwood Road. And so that's really kind of the purpose for the variance and
And
taking
I
care of
understand that. I
that.
just thought part of the problem with the Redwood Road stuff was that we would need additional poles to run the power down and then up.
we do,
or-
and I'll explain more of that in
Okay.
my presentation.
My question is if we run the power from Shilson Lane to the 4 lots, then you have the home out front, everything else just stays the same out front then with this variance.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then just a follow-up question. So the new stuff is being serviced by an underground line, the old stuff by the existing overhead. But the reason that, so I'm guessing that the reason that this code would apply is because the whole parcel is considered the subdivision now?
Correct. Yeah, the subdivision boundary includes both the existing house and the new lots behind it. So it's a 5-lot subdivision.
Can you move up one more picture forward, please?
This one? The green light is grass. todo lo verde es grasa.
A question, if you ran that line all the way back from Schultzen all the way up to the front house and provided power from Schultzen Lane to the front house, is that what, does that create, then you would just have to take the wires down, wouldn't you, or?
Yeah, so you would take the two wires coming off of the main lines, but it still leaves the issue of the lines parallel to Redwood Road, because those are within the
And
subdivision
because
boundaries.
it's a subdivision, you've got to bury them. Okay, I'm with you now. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
However, if that were done, they wouldn't need the additional poles if we granted the variance. If they ran the power from the back, is that correct?
No, they still would. And again, I'll go over that. later.
Oh, okay.
Well, I guess I misunderstood the question.
I'll be patient. I'll ask again if I don't feel
Okay.
like it was answered.
Any other questions from the panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you. You can take a seat, and then we'll turn the time over to Mr. Forsyth to give his presentation and recommendations.
Okay, thank you. So just before we get into the criteria, I just want to kind of go over the city code again. So the code that we're looking at tonight is section 824 of the city code. And this is dealing with the requirement to bury all utility lines. So this includes not only new utility lines, water, sewer, electrical, power, but existing ones as well. Basically anything that crosses that subdivision boundary. So the way this code is written, there are some exceptions to that rule, particularly for regional transmission lines that are over 69 kilovolts. These lines along Redwood Road are under 69 kilovolts, so they're not exempt. The other exemption is for site plans that don't involve a subdivision. But in this case, with this being a subdivision, it is required. So, and then the third exception would be, of course, the variance if the situation can meet the 5 criteria. So this, when the applicant and myself spoke with Rocky Mountain Power, we were trying to figure out the best way to bury these utility lines along Redwood Road. And really the only situation was this plan that you can kind of see here on your screen. But basically, the biggest reason for this is on the northeast corner, there's a pole that's what I'll refer to as a multi-directional pole, meaning it has utility lines that go east to west as well as north to south. So basically in all 4 directions. And in order to run those lines down, basically it's unsafe to run any utility lines directly down on that pole. So in order to do that, we have to actually build another support pole 10 feet away from that multi-directional pole and run the lines down that. However, putting that pole 10 feet from the multi-directional pole would put it right in the middle of an existing access onto Redwood Road. And so we would have to push that further south by about 30 feet or so. And then on the south end, looking at that, of course, there's no support pole for about 300 feet, several properties down. So there would need to be another one added there as well to drop the utility lines. But there's not enough room between the existing driveway along the south property line, you can see there, and the fence. So we would have to push that new pole, the second new pole, up to the north side of that driveway. So basically, we'd have two new poles plus the existing one. And that would leave us with about 68 feet of buried line. So anyway, that's kind of the plan there. I'll just go over the findings here. So with criteria A, this criterion deals primarily with a unique physical hardship that's unique to the property and not self-imposed or created by the applicant or the owner. It was there basically when they got there. It can't be economic, which means they can't get a variance for financial gain or to get out of the cost of putting in those improvements. And it has to be on the property for which the variance is sought. So there's the few circumstances, I kind of alluded to this in the previous plan, but the multi-directional pole, in order to bury those lines, we'd have to add that additional pole. And with that being put basically right in the middle of a driveway, it's a little difficult to see here, but even if we do move that to the side of the access there, this gravel driveway is a little unique that it runs adjacent to the sidewalk. And so you essentially have a pole more or less encroaching in on that driveway. So it makes it a little tough to do that. And you'd actually have the same problem with the one further to the south there. So it's kind of those new poles would essentially kind of interfere with the driveway a little bit. So then moving on to the second criteria. So this deals with a unique physical hardship a physical hardship that's unique to the site and not commonly found in the surrounding neighborhood. So most of the properties on Redwood Road do have support poles, pretty common sight along there. What's unique to this is that most of them don't have a multi-directional support pole where you've got lines going not only north to south, but east to west as well, which in turn would require additional poles just to run the power lines down. The other thing that's a little unique to this is you've got a horseshoe driveway that's right up against the sidewalk. And so some of the other properties along Redwood Road have their horseshoe driveways set a little bit further back. So if hypothetically they were to add some additional poles, it wouldn't really interfere with their driveway. So, and then the third point here, just again, that private lane being so close to the south property line there, it's basically pushing that support pole on the north side. All right. Then the third criteria, this deals with preserving a property right that's enjoyed by other properties in the neighborhood. So basically, the question is, does the variance do that? Would it preserve a property right that's enjoyed by other properties in the neighborhood? So, so looking at some of the neighboring properties, this one here on the left, that's a neighboring property to the south. You can kind of see there that they actually don't have any support poles there, so it's kind of a little bit of a cleaner aesthetic there. And then the property to the north, that's the center picture. That's the adjacent property there. That not only has just one power pole, but it's also got a little bit of a horseshoe driveway there as well. So, so basically, if these properties were to hypothetically bury their power, they'd have a little bit of an easier time with it and could potentially bury more linear feet as opposed to the subject property. Then criterion D, so this is a fourth criteria. This deals with the consistency with the goals and policies of the general plan, just making sure that the variance is consistent with those. So the general plan it has just a few guiding principles. And these are really quite broad and really just kind of generally loosely apply. So there's only a couple that really kind of loosely apply to this situation. And those deal with mostly aesthetics. So just making sure that we're supporting developments that either keep the character of the neighborhood or enhance it. So with this situation, if we were to require them to bury the power lines, we'd basically be adding 2 new poles, a switch box, and end up with only about half of the frontage having buried power lines. So at least in my professional opinion, I don't think it really works towards supporting the aesthetic goals of the general plan. Whereas if we were to keep it as is right now, we'd end up with less power poles, no switch box, and a little bit of a cleaner aesthetic. So. And then the final criteria, this is dealing with the spirit of the law, making sure that if the variance is granted, it obviously wouldn't be meeting the letter of the law, but it would be meeting the spirit of the law, and that we're providing due justice to the property owner. So the main purpose of section 824, that's a typo there. That should be a 4, not a 2. Is really to kind of improve the aesthetics of existing areas or new areas by putting those lines underground, getting rid of those unsightly support poles, promoting public safety, which, some of these poles, they tend to, they're on busy arterials. So if you get a car that careens into them, you can end up with, damaged power poles, live wires. So having those buried is usually better because there's no pole to hit. And then just minimizing maintenance is the third one, really dealing with when you've got underground lines, you're less likely to have them damaged. And so it's kind of less costly maintenance wise over time that way. So okay, that's the 5 criteria in a nutshell. And staff is recommending approval of the variance based on these criteria and this criteria in the staff report. And I can answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Forsyth. You guys have done a very good job on your presentation, and I appreciate it. It makes it a lot easier for us up here. Any questions?
I still have a
from the
few.
panel?
Sorry. Okay, so I guess maybe I'm on the wrong board because I don't understand how it got to this point without using more common sense to try to fix this situation. I feel like there's a newer subdivision a couple streets down. Have we looked at dropping the power, running it clear to that one and connecting it? Would that be more cost effective, more aesthetically pleasing? I also don't understand why we're not rethinking the pulling it from the back instead of getting all these wires still going and try to go with the overall want of the city, just in a slightly different way. I guess, I don't even know if these are real questions for what we're asked to do. I feel like I have to ask them.
Yeah, so going back to, let me go back to this plan here. Yeah, so most of those lots behind there would have buried power. It's just the one in front of what to do with that. And like Mr. Heiner said, we could theoretically run the power to the existing house, depending on where switch boxes are. Although it looks like the current hookup is in the front, so you may have to do some odd jogs around the house, but anyway, in that case, we would just drop those two lines connecting it, but there's still the issue of the power lines that are on Redwood Road. So those would have to be buried too.
In
And so
other
that's really kind of the reason
In
behind.
other words, those Redwood Road power lines need to stay because it's transmitting the power down the line, so you couldn't cut it off there.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, you could theoretically, it is physically possible to bury those lines along Redwood Road. It's just, we would have to do this, essentially.
So is the power buried near here, going up and down Redwood Road?
I'm not aware of any that are close by. The only one I know of is the Ganson Lane subdivision, which is a bit further down south of Gardner Lane. Those power lines were buried.
Okay. And what about the existing pole, the second one just to the west on that property line? Is it a multi-directional? It doesn't,
That one's just an east to west, so no.
so
It
it
just
couldn't,
runs, yeah, it's just a lateral coming off the main line.
okay.
And that one services the neighbor to the north only.
Right, I was just thinking if they could use that one to get the power to his house, the front house, rather than coming up from the back, then would none of these other extra poles be needed?
Not necessarily, because the lines run in front of, or along the frontage of the property, so they're essentially in the subdivision.
I mean, I know
boundary.
they'll still be hanging, but we wouldn't need 2 additional poles that way.
Well, if we buried those, yeah, because, so the thing with those poles is they're actually on a separate property. They're not on the applicants, so we can't necessarily require someone to do work on someone else's property.
Okay.
So it becomes tricky that way.
By burying, the way this shows now, by doing it this way, will the north power pole, will that require a support pole? Am I hearing that?
Yeah,
right?
so the,
So you'd
yeah,
have
so
to add
the,
an additional pole if you did it on this,
yeah, so that additional pole is that blue one there.
and it would just be the one pole 10 feet from the north pole, the existing north pole?
So it'd be two new poles, so that it'd be the one on the south end of that access there, and then the one on the north side of the
Because you have that
driveway.
other,
Yeah.
I see, okay.
Yeah,
that
so
makes
those,
sense to
those
me. So
two
you would,
blue circles, yeah, those are the new poles that are needed.
so you would still have overhead lines partially over the road,
Hmm.
on the
Yeah, so you'd,
south end.
you'd still have
and you'd have a pole there.
overhead lines.
You'd have to have a pole there anyway, right?
Mhm.
And going
Yeah, so you'd
down
have
and then
about
burying
25
across.
feet on each side of overhead lines that would still have to remain anyway.
So that would really only, that would only be take care of it partially. You'd still
Yeah,
have-
in fact, it would be half, only half of that frontage would actually have buried lines.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
If you wouldn't mind, can you go back to the criteria C one? If my understanding is correct, part of the reason this is a required thing is because it's a subdivision and that's what they're working for. Are these other properties subdivisions as well?
No, these are just other existing properties that are adjacent to this one. So no development has occurred on those at all.
Mhm.
It,
So would that be the same as, I'm trying to think how to word this. Would these be considered like properties then, that we're saying it's similar to other properties having the same rights?
Yeah, so this is, exactly, yeah, so this is just looking at other properties in the neighborhood and examining the conditions there to see if those conditions are the same or different, basically.
I have maybe a follow-up question to that. The applicant showed photos of subdivisions that, by my understanding, he said that these were subdivisions that still had the power lines across the property. Has that been a common practice in the area or in subdivisions in West Jordan, that there are a lot or are a significant amount of properties that have those unburied power lines?
Yeah, I'm not sure about those. I didn't actually do any work on those, so I really don't know what was discussed, but.
Okay, and then maybe bringing back the question that I had earlier about the driveway. So that's one of the criteria because potentially the power lines interfere with the drive and the power lines also not only do they interfere with the horseshoe driveway, the gravel part of it, but potentially with the outlet that's further north on the property. So my question is that a significant enough burden to consider it a burden? Couldn't the road just be widened a little bit? I'm just interested in the discussion from the rest of the board.
We can discuss that we can discuss that as we move forward with each criteria.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions for the applicant? And or the staff? Oh,
Sorry, one more. So the location of the driveway, a unique characteristic is it's really close to the property borders, but I'm guessing that there's nothing that would prevent that from occurring in any property, having the driveway just basically at the edge of the property.
Not necessarily. So this is kind of an existing condition on the property. I mean, one could theoretically, move driveways in and out if they needed to, but
Yeah,
anyway.
just that makes sense. That answers it.
okay, thank you.
On these subdivisions, I'm going to make the driveway a lot bigger. And is one fire hydrant on Redwood Road. I need to move this one because the city say, oh no, UDOT say like it's very dangerous for the people to came and wanna get inside of the property. I need to move that one, the fire hydrant, 10 feet north side. Okay? If I'm going to put the post just to bury the existing lines, I think I'm going to have some problems with UDOT.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, you can have a seat. We'll now open it up for a public hearing. The public comment portion of the hearing is now open. If you would like to comment on this item, please come to the podium and give your name for the record. Please address the board with your comments. You have 3 minutes. Seeing no public input, we'll close the public hearing portion of our meeting. And now the board can discuss the application and request any additional information from the planning staff or from the attorney. What I'd like to do is start with each criteria, if you could start here with will the literal, with the questions, we can discuss them. Will the literal enforcement of the ordinance cause an unreasonable hardship for the applicant? Am I on the right track, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry, we had some technical difficulties.
Oh,
So we're
I'm
not.
just referring to my notes.
Yeah,
now to
nope,
go
your
down
notes
the
are
list.
fine. I wish we could publish them up there for you.
Okay, I think
We
I
had
can,
something happen.
I can
um,
manage with that.
But yes, you are right. That is the first criteria. Literal enforcement would cause an unreasonable hardship. And then what I would say is just under the code, to determine whether or not enforcement would cause an unreasonable hardship, the Board of Adjustment shall not find unreasonable hardship unless the alleged hardship is one, located on or associated with the property, and two, comes from circumstances peculiar to the property, not from conditions that are general to the neighborhood. And maybe, Mr. Chair, could I make just a quick statement too, just to
Absolutely, yes.
maybe narrow this down a little bit? So I think, and from what I've seen tonight, the only parcel that's needing a variance is that front property. Is that right, Mr. Forsyth? And the back subdivision area doesn't need a variance. Basically, the decision for the board is, can the front parcel keep their existing power lines, or do they need to bury them? That's my understanding. Is that oversimplification maybe, but that's what we're looking at. Is it okay for the home as it stands today to keep the power lines that it has, or do they need to bury them for the front home only? The back parcels all have their buried access taken care of. Is that right? Okay. So we're really just looking at that front parcel and whether they need a variance from the city's code. And so that's the hardship that we're looking at. That's the unreasonableness that we're analyzing and considering.
I think it definitely meets this criteria just because of the multi-directional pole causing the needed additional 2 poles. Or 1 additional pole, I guess.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
I just think it meets the existing criteria for how it's situated currently. And so because it's adding the subdivision, it's changing criteria based on how the house is currently situated. And so I think it would be a hardship based on the fact that it's changing not the existing property, but they have to change it because of the adjacent properties coming into the subdivision. So I think it would be unreasonable for the existing property just because of the work on the adjacent new subdivision property.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other thoughts? What I'd like to do is just take a motion on each criteria, if that's okay with the attorney. How do you want to, what?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I don't think we need a motion on each one. But just because each element needs to be satisfied, maybe just seeing if anybody doesn't feel like
Okay,
that's
great.
satisfied, and then moving on to the next one.
Not hearing any oppositions on criterion, on the first criterion, I'd like to move on to the next one. Was the hardship created by the owner, or is the hardship economic? It's one of the questions. You have anything to expand on that or expound?
Mr. Chair, maybe what I would just say is whether or not the board feels like they've heard anything today related to this being a purely economic hardship, or whether they feel like they've received any evidence or information stating that this was created by the property owner, this issue.
I don't see any, I don't see it being economic or created by the property owner.
It sounded like the applicant made multiple efforts with both Rocky Mountain Power and the city to try to find other options. And I think the variance would probably be the best solution.
It seems as though the property has created the economic problem. So yes, I agree with that too. The layout.
I also concur. I think the applicant has done his due diligence and has gone back and forth with several organizations to make sure that he's in compliance and find solutions that works for everyone.
Thank you. Okay, I see. Let's move on to the next one. Is the literal enforcement of the ordinance necessary to carry out the general purpose of the land use regulations? The purpose of the land use regulations will continue to be satisfied even if the variance is granted. I guess that's would be a specific finding. I'm getting ahead of myself there, but anyway, that's a point of discussion. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, aside from having some questions on some other ones still, but I think just if we look at is the purpose of the title carried out? I mean, the purpose is from what I understand, to improve public safety and improve aesthetics. Adding another pole doesn't improve aesthetics. And it sounds like this could contribute to more unsafe situations just because we're adding more poles and more obstacles that could potentially be hit.
Thank you. Moving on, would the granting of the variance be essential to the enjoyment of a substantial property right possessed by the other property in the same zone? In other words, the way I read this, are there other properties in the vicinity that have the same situation? A similar situation.
I think the presentation showed that there were other properties that didn't have more poles, I guess, too many poles, and also had a horseshoe driveway, similar setup.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I maybe clarify that element? So what this particular requirement is asking is what sort of property right is being sought here by the applicant, right? And the property right that they're looking for is development and subdivision of their parcel. So is the variance necessary for the applicant to enjoy this property right by subdividing that is unique in some way to this property that's not a general issue across the entire, was it R18 zone? So we have a lot of R18 across the city. Is subdividing of the property, is a variance necessary for the subdividing of the property? And is it an integral kind of part of why the variance would be needed at this particular time with this particular parcel that's unique from other R18? And so I think, there's been some discussion about other parcels here in the neighborhood, but we're looking at kind of what's unique about this particular situation and what property right are we seeking to kind of protect or allow for.
Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts on that criterion?
I think this may have been kind of what I was alluding to earlier, trying to find out if the other properties that we were looking at were the same zoning and property. And I think even though maybe the adjacent properties may not be the same zone, they have the same rights that he has we would be granting by approving this variance. So I think it would be appropriate to have the variance to keep with the same feel of the neighborhood.
I have one question, on the subdivision to the north. It looks like a newer subdivision. It looked to me like the power line was buried in front of that subdivision, and then the pole started at the south end and went from there. So that subdivision was required to bury, if I saw that right on. Keep going. Maybe it was, let's see, yeah, keep going. Oh, yes, okay, right here, the bottom left-hand corner. Oh, okay, there are lines going across that subdivision as well. Correct?
Yeah, there are,
Okay,
So the right that he's seeking is to subdivide. But this variance or this doesn't really prevent him from subdividing. It just means that he's got to put in power poles. So I guess in that definition of it, it's not preventing him from enjoying the right to subdivide. It's just requiring him to do additional work. Are there other rights that he's seeking that aren't being met?
Yeah, so it relates back again to the unreasonable hardship that we're looking at. And is this, if he didn't subdivide his property, would this be imposed upon him? The only reason he's having to even seek a variance is because of the subdividing, because he's using his property as he's allowed to do. Lawful, rightful use and enjoyment of his property. And because he's seeking to enjoy his property as anybody else might in the same zone, he's having this unreasonable restriction placed upon him, if that's what you find.
Okay, that makes sense.
okay. The next question I have for the panel is will the granting of the variance affect the general plan?
It sounds like granting the variance actually is more in keeping with general plan than what not approving it would do. We'd be adding additional poles instead of removing them. And so I think maybe is in the spirit of the public interest that we would be approving the variance.
Public interest and safety because of the additional poles that could, like Mr. Forsyth said, create an additional traffic hazard if someone were to run off the road there. Any other thoughts from the panel?
I agree with what was just said.
Okay, having discussed,
Did we talk about criteria too, that there are special circumstances attached to the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the same district? Did we talk about that one?
yeah, the one, that's why I
Okay.
asked the question. We went north again with the power line hanging over the new subdivision. I can see
So,
again, Liberty, is that? what
Again,
you
I'm just
think?
gonna bring, I want to discuss this horseshoe driveway just because I brought it up a couple times, but do we feel like that horseshoe driveway I just want I want the opinion of the board. Is that something that it is an existing condition or could it be changed easy enough? Is that something we should really consider as one of the existing conditions? What's everybody else's thought?
I think the ingress and egress is important with the horseshoe driveway. And if you brought the poles in, you'd have to shorten that horseshoe driveway. And you'd also have problems with, that I can see, ingress on the south end going into the lots on the south end. I mean, you shrink the horseshoe part of it. And I mean, that's, you could probably get by with that. I would suppose. It's easy for me to say I'm not living there, but you could probably get by with that. But I don't, I just think it would be safety issues more than anything, personally.
Thanks.
I feel like that compounds the issue that we're looking at because there is a pole directly in his front of his house and the horseshoe driveway. If it was one or the other, then I think it would be more reasonable to find an alternate solution. But I think compounding them together, it fits the need for the variance.
Thank you.
All right, hearing no more discussion, the chair would entertain a motion.
Sorry, Mr.
Go
Chair,
on.
just one more consideration for you.
Mhm.
So the last requirement in the code is that the spirit of the title is observed and substantial justice done. So I just would recommend maybe a just brief discussion on that one. It's the last one. It's usually the easiest, but at least check the box.
Well, I think it would be an injustice not to,
It-
let the public, to let them move forward, not let them move forward, excuse me.
Yeah, I guess just to sum it up, I feel like they did bury the power lines to the new parts of the property. This condition is really for the older plot of the property. And it would be adding poles based on the circumstances that exist. And that's really against what the title was there for anyway. It was, I mean, adding more poles seems like a counterproductive, so.
Great, thank you. Feel like we've given it a good discussion and, like I said, it'd be open for a, what's the word I'm looking for?
But based on our discussion, I think we've found enough cause to vote to approve the variance.
So, Mr. Chair, maybe what I would recommend, so in the packet submitted by Mr. Forsyth, I think there's a recommended motion
Yeah, there's a
that's in
motion.
there. And so if the board feels comfortable making the recommended motion, I think there's language prepared.
Go ahead, Michael.
Based upon the Board of Adjustment findings that the applicant has met all variance criteria required by state statutes and city ordinances. I move that the Board of Adjustment approve the variance for the applicant's property located at 8482 South Redwood Road, modifying the requirement of burying the existing overhead power lines along Redwood Road.
I second the motion.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Clifton Smith and a second by Christine Wright. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion is passed 5-0. Seeing no other business, I close the meeting.
I make a motion to close
Oh.
the meeting.
Motion to adjourn, yeah.
I
Motion
second
to
that.
adjourn. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Did I do right? Did I do
You
good?
can take a vote for.
Oh, yes. Let's take a vote to adjourn.
Aye.
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 Oh. I have a motion and votes to adjourn. Thank you.